Hello, this is Coach Wilson, and this is Unit 9, Day 9. Today's journal, I'd like for you to answer these three questions, and then we're going to move on into the notes. Now, today's notes are on the Great Depression, and we've been rolling through the roaring 20s, and now we're going to be moving into the Great Depression. And we're going to try to answer these questions. Number one, what were some causes of the Great Depression? How did the stock market crash affect even those Americans who weren't invested? And then how will Franklin Roosevelt attempt to ease the Depression? Now, underlying causes of the Great Depression. Number one, depressed agricultural prices after World War I, European crops finally producing again. Okay. Wage increases didn't keep up with factory output, and you had a large increases in prices. You also had an overproduction of consumer goods, and that was in part because of the assembly line. And then lagging industries of railroad, steel, textiles made it harder to recover. So, in short, we have an issue with farming. Okay, so, we're having trouble selling our agriculture, our farming products, okay, or our food and our crops. We've got factories who are, they're increasing output, but they're not able to keep up with the sales in order to afford paying their employees. And because they can't afford to pay their employees the rising wage prices, that means that their employees can't afford to buy the products that are raising in price because they're producing more. And that goes back to the overproduction of consumer goods. And that is, like I said, thanks to the assembly line. And then on top of that, the railroad and the steel industry have slowed down quite significantly because the railroads are expanding as much as they can expand. There really isn't anywhere else for them to build. And as a result, that industry suffers, and then just the textiles industry in general is suffering as well, made it harder for people to function. Now, Herbert Hoover has been elected as president during this time, and he takes over a booming economy, which had been attributed to the Republicans. That's one of the reasons he was elected. The problem is there's these huge underlying causes to this economy. Even though wages are increasing and there's all this money flowing around, there's also a lot of things that are just kind of on the teeter-totter if it could go bad at any point. Hoover was focused on trying to end poverty, promising 2 cars in every garage, and stock prices rose during Hoover's election. He had promised to uphold Harding and Coolidge's free enterprise practices for businesses, meaning businesses could expand with little interference from the government and not nearly the problems that they had faced in an earlier period. Hoover increased taxes, trying to fix the budget deficit in the government, and ended up doing very little to actually help the economy in which regular citizens lived. Now, the government policies from the Republicans was one of the first causes of the Depression. All right, Congress cut taxes on corporations and wealthy individuals. So basically what they did was they lowered the amount that rich people are paying, but kept the same or raised the prices of those regular individuals in the economy. All right, and this is going to create a lot of problems for your everyday consumer. The second problem is there's a lot of trouble in the industry. Textiles, steel, and railroads struggled to make profits after they had boomed during World War I, and now they were overproducing, meaning there was a lower consumer demand leading to a surplus of goods. Anytime that there's overproduction, that means there's going to be less demand than what you're making, which means that there's this surplus that you can't get rid of. That in turn hurts businesses. Okay, these are construction contracts awarded in the United States. Okay, the total rewarded, and then the red are residential, and then the blue are all other. Okay, so this is just to kind of show you where a lot of our problem exists, is that we're in 1929 over $500 million in total contracts for construction are being awarded, and then you look in 1931 we're down to 100 million. Okay, that's a 80% drop in the amount of money that we were actually able to spend and the amount of production and construction going on. So you can see there's a boom and then there's a fall. Now, agricultural issues is the third problem leading to the Great Depression. During World War I, the initial demand for crops caused the price to rise. So farmers began planting more crops, and they were trying to meet the demand for the war effort and for the country. They even took out more loans to buy land and expensive farming equipment to try to increase production. The problem is the war's over, meaning the demand for many of these farm products has decreased. Crop prices fall, and overproduction and surplus ensue. Now, if you're overproducing. That means you've got crops that you spent money on to grow, and now you can't sell them. Plus, the things that you are selling for cheaper, meaning you're not making the money that you had planned on making before you grew it. That's going to create some problems. Okay, this is just to show you an example. All right, corn, for example, between 1912 and 1913, right there, kind of leading into the war, was selling for 50 cents a bushel. Now it's selling for 20 cents a bushel. That's 30 cents cheaper. Okay, wheat, 88 cents. Now it's down to 41 cents. And in your head, I know you're saying, well, Coach Wilson, that's not that big a deal. It's 56 cents. We got to think about the difference in prices. So, for example, in 1929, the average annual income for an American family was $750, but for farm families, it was only about $273. All right, so they relied on this, these crops to be able to survive. And guys, I don't think you quite sometimes look at these prices and think, well, that's not that big a deal, but money wasn't inflated like it is now. And having $1,000 was a ton of money, like we would look at having $50,000 or $60,000. Here you can see a sign of just kind of the conditions people were living in. They were just struggling to make it. A lot of times people lived in shanty houses. We'll talk about shanty towns a little bit. People were selling apples for 5 cents each, just doing anything they could to make a buck. Now, some other problems, you have these consumer issues, and this is the fourth reason for the Depression. Many people had overbought on credit, which was spurred by advertising, things such as radios and automobiles, and the rising prices and wages remaining the same meant that people couldn't afford it. So here's the problem. Prices are rising, so people are forced to take out credit to try to continue to afford what they want. Their wages aren't increasing because the businesses can't sell enough to increase their wages to justify it. And so you have this huge uneven distribution of wealth. And essentially what's going to be the bigger problem is that, if you want to go to the stock market, and we'll talk about this more in a second, and you want to buy stock, and you have $1,000 cash to spend on stock. Well, that's great. You bought $1,000 worth of stock out of cash. Here's the problem. These people were taking out credit, so they're going negative 1,000. Then they're buying stock. Well, then the stock crashes and it goes from negative 1,000 to their stock price goes down, which means now they're negative 4,000. So not only did they take out credit for $1,000, now they're $4,000 credit below even further. Does that make sense? Like it's this huge reverberating effect of people trying to buy. They're not living within their means is the best way I can put it. The other issue here, and number 5 of our causes for the Depression, is after World War I, European demand for American goods had declined. European industry was regaining its footing right there towards the early end of 1920s into the early 30s. And so we tried to put a tariff called the Hawley-Smoot tariff on goods, which was the highest protective tariff in U.S. history. The problem is it hurt the world economy. In trying to help America, we ended up hurting European nations and hurting ourselves because no one could afford the tariff. All right. Here's a look at just a chart of the initial crash, and this is kind of the stock market, and basically shows the banking crisis where prices are just deflating. The big thing you need to understand here is the negative trend in everything of value. Now, the stock market itself, and this is, I think, what we learned the most about. It seems like when we talk about the Great Depression, it is the 6th cause of the Depression. And that's because throughout the 1920s, stock prices had steadily increased, but more and more people bought stocks and bonds, were buying them on credit. Okay? Because people were buying more stocks and bonds, it leads to speculation, meaning that investors buy stocks and bonds on the chance that they might make a quick profit and ignore the risk. So they're speculating that a stock is going to grow, meaning they buy it in hopes that they'll be able to sell it off quick and make profit. Many people bought on what we call on the margin, and that goes back to what I'm talking about, buying with money you don't have. So the easiest way I can explain this to you is the stock market is a group of businesses that they get you to invest your money, they make money using your money, and then when you're ready to take your money out of their company, they pay you the money that based on the value of their company that you invested. So it's like a percentage increase. So let's say I had $1,000 and the stock goes up 10%, well, I'm going to get my 1,000 plus 10%. Okay? Now, that's the easiest way to explain. It's not exactly mathematically, there's a whole lot of other things going on there, but that's so you understand kind of the idea of why you put your money in the stock market. Well, these people weren't putting their money in the stock market. They were putting the bank's money. Okay? They were paying a small percentage of the stock's price as a down payment and then borrowing the rest from stockbrokers. And that's bad because if your stock price declined, you had no way of paying the money back. All right? And the last thing is the bank failures. Okay? Many frightened Americans who saw the stock market going down in 1929 began running and flocking to the banks, and all of them tried to pull out their money at once. Well, here's the problem. The bank doesn't have all that money. The bank relies on you leaving your money in there and drawing it out at a period at a time so that they can loan money out. So, for example, 10 people put $1,000 in the bank. We have $10,000 in that bank. Well, the bank gives somebody a $10,000 loan. Well, the idea is that one person will keep paying that money back, and those 10 people will sporadically come and get money out of the bank to where they don't have, the bank doesn't have to be responsible for that $10,000 immediately that is technically accredited to all 10 of our accounts. Okay? Now, banks only hold a portion of an investor's money. The rest of it's used to make loans. And between 1929 and 1931, 3,000 banks, roughly about 10% of all banks in the United States, collapsed. Now, we will pick up with the rest of the Great Depression in our next day of notes. But for now, get these vocabulary words on overproduction, the Hawley-Smoot tariff, and speculation. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, I'll talk to you soon.